Mrs. Crime, Mr. Wade, bringing you the stories. Stay tuned for a lot more. Today's unfortunate story is about a Scott William Cox. He's a suspected American serial killer convicted on 2 separate accounts of homicide in the year of 1993 in Portland, Oregon, and suspected of many more. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but was granted parole in the year of 2013, 5 years early. He currently is serving a post-prison supervision term of life. He is also the prime suspect in 20 unsolved murder cases throughout the United States and Canada, although charges were never brought against him. Since the year of 1975, Cox has been admitted to mental institutions 115 times. He was convicted of forgery and gun theft prior to his murder conviction. At the time of his arrest for murder, he was living under post-prison supervision for the crime of forgery. He worked as long-haul truck driver, operating mainly within the Pacific Northwest and traveling as far as Canada and Mexico and as far east as Ohio. On November 24th, year 1990, Rena Ann Brunson, a 34-year-old woman, was found in the front of a Portland, Oregon Safeway store. She had been severely beaten, had cuts on her chin, neck, back, and had been handcuffed and stabbed in the heart. She was found alive but in critical condition. She was swiftly transported to the hospital but was soon pronounced dead. A few months later, on February 19th, year 1991, the body of Victoria Roan was found in a train in a Portland rail yard. She had been tied up with the attacker's shirt and strangled to death. Both murders were left unsolved for about 2 years. On May 30th, year 1991, a female victim of Cox was found alive in downtown Seattle. She had been beaten, bitten, raped, and left for dead. She had ligature marks around her neck, and wine bottle had been forced into her rectum. A witness reported seeing the victim thrown out of the cab of a truck. The victim lived, but required hospitalization. She was interviewed by a local detective who advised her to prosecute him. However, she didn't pursue charges and subsequently left the state. Local detectives believe this to be an attempted murder perpetrated by a serial killer or a serial killer in the making. The witness described to detectives the truck the victim was thrown out of as having a logo for a company named Woodland Trucking. Upon contacting the company, it was revealed that the assailant was an employee named Seth Scott Cutter. Detectives interviewed Cutter, who proclaimed his innocence and stated that he had been trying to help the woman. The detectives did not believe him and attempted to pursue charges against him. However, because the DNA evidence found at the crime scene was not yet ready and the victim had fled, detectives were unable to press charges against Cutter. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that Cutter had previously assaulted another woman in November 26, year 1990. A witness reported seeing Cutter in a Mazda with Oregon license plates. Cutter revealed that he was a resident of Newburgh, Oregon, and lived in a motel in the town where he was not on the road. Fearing that he was a serial killer, police issued a bulletin for Oregon and Washington for Seth Scott Cutter. Detectives in Newburgh recognized Cutter but knew him as Scott William Cox, his real name. He was charged and convicted of forgery for creating fake identification under a Salem name. Around the same time, he was also charged and convicted of gun theft in Medford, Oregon. Served a 6-month jail sentence. Newburgh detectives opened a murder investigation into Cox in the year of 1991, and he ultimately confessed to the murder of Rena Ann Brunson. Cox claimed he was mad at his girlfriend and wanted to release his anger by beating a prostitute. After drinking whiskey and snorting cocaine, he picked up Brunson in his car and then began beating her. As she attempted to escape, Cox stabbed her once in the heart, left her for dead, and drove away. He also confessed to the murder of Victoria Rome and to beating several other women, but denied killing anyone else. Prior to his murder convictions, Cox had already gained the attention of detectives nationwide due to his job as a long-haul truck driver. His work took him to over 3,000 different locations throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico, making him the prime suspect in 20 other murder cases, which to this day has remained unsolved. He was also briefly looked at by law enforcement as possibly being the Green River Killer, although detectives believe he was probably too young at the time to be such a prolific killer. On September 15th, year 1993, Scott William Cox pleaded to no contest to 2 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 2 150-month consecutive terms, followed by lifetime post-prison supervision. In an interview with a local Fox affiliate in Portland, Oregon, a district attorney in the case against Cox explained that the case had been hurt due to police investigators improperly obtaining the confession. The judge had dismissed the confessions in court, and the prosecution relied solely on DNA evidence to prove the murders. And had these confessions not been dismissed, Cox may have been charged with aggravated murder, which could have led to life in prison or even capital punishment. 1 year after Cox's conviction, Multnomah County voter passed ballot measure 11, creating mandatory minimums for violent criminals, which would have led to a 50-year sentence for Cox with no possibility of any early release. After serving 20 years of his 25-year sentence, Scott William Cox was released on parole on February 22nd, year 2013. He's required to wear a GPS tracking device, is geographically restricted to Yamhill County, cannot go to parks or bars, and is subject to a curfew every night unless given permission. Because he was living in Yamhill County, Oregon at the time of his arrest, he was returned there upon his release. He was sent to live in subsidized Yamhill County jailhouse living. Yamhill County Corrections issued a community alert prior to his release in order to warn the public of his danger and to advise the public not to attempt to apprehend him. Since his release, Cox had been arrested at least 6 times for parole violation. The first occurrence was in July 2013, 5 months after his release. He was given permission to go to the beach, but not had taken a different longer route than approved. He was sentenced to 14 days in jail. The following month, in August 2013, his GPS tracking device showed that he had visited a girlfriend's home. She confirmed to deputies that Cox was in her home with her 2 children. A sex offender package was added to Cox's parole, which required him to stay away from children in schools. On September 30th, year 2013, he was sentenced to 90 days in jail after surveillance video caught him smuggling chewing tobacco into the county jail. He was again arrested for parole violations on December 1st, year 2014, May 13th, 2014, and January 7th, year 2016. Although details of these have not been provided to the public. Cox is the prime suspect in at least 20 other unsolved murders. Among these cases included most notably Tia Hicks of Seattle, Washington, who went missing in December, year 1990. On April 22nd, year 1991, Seattle police discovered her body and ruled her death a homicide. The only suspect the police had was Cox, who was in the area at the time of Hicks' disappearance. He had already been charged with 2 other murders in Oregon at the time. He became a suspect in the Hicks case. After the murder convictions of Cox, the Hicks case was closed. Following his release from prison, the case was reopened in year 2014. Mountain Lake Terrace police interviewed Cox, expressed the need for the case to be closed, and offered immunity for a confession. However, Cox refused to confess. It remains the only cold case in Mountain Lake Terrace, and Cox remains the only suspect. In addition to being suspected of the murder of Tia Hicks, Cox is also the prime suspect of the 1988 murder of Hazel Galnett in Snohomish County, Washington. Vicki Lynn Perkins of Portland, Oregon, who was found murdered in eastern Utah in May of 1990. And Stephanie Douglas of McMinnville, Oregon, who went missing in November, year of 1990. However, the identities of the majority of other possible victims have not been made public, and many investigations are still ongoing. I hope you enjoy this unfortunate story. I'm Mr. Wade and Mrs. Crime. And once again, we bring it